Hello. Today we're going to use our TI 83 Plus, or 84 graphing calculator to find the mean, variance, and standard deviation for grouped data. First, we're going to need to find the midpoints of our intervals. So I'm going to add a row to our table. You need to do this step whether you're doing the calculation by hand or with your calculator, as we're going to do. So I add a row to my table. Okay, in each row under midpoint, we want to find the midpoint of our interval. There are several ways to do this. One is to average the endpoints. Okay, remember that means to add the two together and divide by 2, since we'll have 2 entries. So I take the 1.5, which is the bottom endpoint of my first interval. I add it to the 4.5, which is the upper endpoint, and then I divide by 2. So that's going to give me 6 divided by 2, which is 3. That's my midpoint. Alternatively, I can determine the distance between them, or the width of my interval. To do that, I would subtract. So these are 3 units apart. So the half of the width would be 1/2 times 3, which is 1.5. So add that to the lower bound, or the lower limit of your interval. So I take the 1.5, add 1.5, which will give me 3. So that's an alternative way to do my midpoint. Let's do the next one. So if I do the next one, I'll do it both ways also. If I take the 4.5, add the 7.5, that gives me, divide by 2, that's going to give me 12 over 2, which is 6. So I write that in my midpoint column. Alternatively, I take the lower edge and then add that 1.5, which is half the width. In other words, I start at the bottom edge, add half the width. That should put me halfway through the interval. So that also gives me 6. As long as your intervals are equally wide, as long as they are all of equal width, all your midpoints will be the same distance apart, and that's the case here. If you do the rest, you'll find I get 9, 12, 15, 18, and 21. Okay, now we need the mean, standard deviation, and everything. So I'm going to go to my calculator and I'm going to enter these entries. Okay, so we're going to be using the stats menu and the list menu, which is right above it. So find your stat button, which is just below and to the left of your arrow keys. You'll see my keystrokes on the right if you want to follow along and forget what I did. If you don't see it the first time, you can just look there. So I'm going to press stat. And I'm going to press edit, which will allow me to edit my list. Okay, one of your lists, you will have one list for the midpoints, you will have another list for the frequencies. I'm going to put the midpoint in first, and you'll see that's the order the calculator prefers me to have it in once we get to the operation. I already have some entries in here, so I want to clear them out. To do that, I arrow up until my cursor is on top of L1. I hit the clear button and I hit enter. That will clear off my list. You can also type over the entries that are already there, but sometimes that can be a bit confusing. So I just hit 3, enter, 6, enter, 9, enter, and go down, each time hitting enter, and it'll carry me down the list until I'm done. Okay, you'll see that right now it says L1 of 8 at the bottom of my screen. If I scroll up, it tells me L1 of 7 is 21, and that means my 7th entry is 21. If you'll check your table, you'll see that we do indeed have 7 rows, and if we scroll back up, we can verify that we entered everything in correctly. Now I'm going to move over to L2. If you already had entries here, you would again scroll up to L2, hit clear, and then enter to get rid of them. Mine's empty, so I just need to enter my frequencies. So 3, enter, 4, enter, 6, enter, 2, enter, then 10, 9, and 8. and just double check against your table, scroll back up through it, and make sure everything matches like it should and that you have not made an error typing anything in. Okay, now we are going to quit out of here and return to our home screen. Okay, there's a couple different things we can do here. First, let's go to Stats and then scroll over to Calc. I'm going to choose one variable stats, the very first entry. Okay, here, if you do not put anything in, it will assume that you are finding the statistics for just a list of entries. It will not assume you have group data. It will just, if you do not put in entry here, it will use L1, and it will use it just as a list of data points, as you have probably seen in a previous example. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put L1, and then I'm going to put comma, and then I'm going to put L2. I'm reaching these by looking at, on my calculator, they're blue. If you'll look above the number keys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll see L1, L2, L3. Yours may be yellow or pink or some other color, depending on how pretty your calculator is. Anyway, you reach them by using the second function button. Okay, so I'm going to do L1, comma L2. You must put the midpoints first. My midpoints were in L1, therefore I must put them first. If I had the frequencies in L1 and the midpoints in L2, that would be fine, but I would have to then put L2 first in my calculator. It wants the midpoints first because those represent the actual values of the data points, and then it'll put the frequencies second. Okay, so now we hit enter. It's going to give me a whole bunch of useful information, including the mean, which is the very first thing. This is X bar. Let's write that down. I'll round it to 4 decimal places. When you get the mean, look at it and see if it seems reasonable based on your data set. Here, all our data points are between 1.5 and 22.5. Okay, and it looks like I have a whole bunch in that interval between 13.5 and 16.5. 14.07 certainly seems reasonable for my mean. If you do something wrong, like forget to put both lists in, or if you put your lists in the wrong order, it will give you, there will be a high likelihood it will give you an answer that does not make sense. Perhaps an answer that is not even in the range of your data points. So always look at your mean and make sure it seems reasonable. If not, see if you made an error either in putting in your entries or which list you told the calculator to calculate. We'll always assume that the first list you put is the midpoints, the second list is the frequencies. Okay, let's go back to our calculator. Let's see what else we can write down. Notice it's giving me the sample standard deviation, which is Sx, the population standard deviation, which is sigma x. Your calculator does not know if you have a sample or a population. Remember, the formula is slightly different for a sample and for a population. With a population, your denominator is n. For your variance and standard deviation, with population, your denominator is n. With a sample, your denominator is n minus 1. So you will get slightly different answers. Okay, so let's assume this is a sample, which with group data it nearly always is. So let's write down our sample standard deviation. Which is about 5.6801. Okay, you'll see it gives you some other information here. It gives you quartiles, your median, and actually the way that it does the median is technically not correct. What the calculator does for your median is it puts it chooses the number that is the midpoint of the bar in which your median occurs. However, your median could actually be slightly to the left or the right of the center of that bar. What really you should do is to draw a histogram and calculate the area on one side and the area on the other. The median will be the place at which half the area is above, half the area is below. I'll show you how to do that in a different video. So disregard this median number, although it's certainly a helpful approximation. It'll get you close enough for many purposes. It'll tell me how many data points there are. If you'll add up your frequencies, you will discover that there are 42 data points here. If we had a population, our standard deviation is 5.6120. Okay, now what if we wanted the sample variance? I don't see variance in this list. So we're going to have to get to that a different way. So let's clear this out and return to our home screen. Now I'm going to go to list where there are some more stats functions hidden away. Let's go to math. Okay, you'll see some other useful things here. Let's go down to variance. Whoops, I missed it. Okay, I'm going to highlight variance. Now in here, I'm going to do L1, comma L2. Again, it wants the midpoints first, frequencies second. And close out the parentheses. Okay, it gives me about 32.2631. Let's write this down. Remember, we indicate this with S squared, 32.2631. The advantage of approaching it this way is that now it shows up as the previous answer on our calculator, so we can do continuing calculations with it. I'm going to take its square root to get my standard deviation, and actually the efficient way to do this is to just raise it to the 0.5 power, because that's the same as taking the square root. Notice it's going to use this for its previous answer, ANS, and if I hit enter, it gives me 5.680058,644, which when we round up 4 decimal places is the same 5.6801 that we found before. So it does match up as we would expect. I hope this is helpful for you in using your graphing calculator to find statistics for grouped data. Thanks for listening.